Waitress stopped a slap meant for the Alpha King's mother. The revenge that followed shocked everyone. The sound of a hand about to strike filled the diner before it ever landed. Mara Voss saw it happen in the space of one breath. A furious young woman named Priscilla Danvers had her arm raised, aimed straight at the face of an older woman sitting quietly at the corner booth. There was no time to think. Mara moved before her mind caught up with her body, stepping between the two women just as the hand came down. The slap landed on Mara's cheek instead, sharp and stinging, loud enough that every customer in the diner turned to look. For a moment, nobody spoke. The older woman, whose name was Eleanor Cade, sat frozen in her seat, one hand pressed to her chest. Priscilla stood with her arm still extended, her face twisted between shock and anger, as if she could not understand what had just happened. Mara held her ground, her cheek burning, her eyes steady on Priscilla. "You need to leave," Mara said, her voice calm despite the pain. "Now." Priscilla's eyes narrowed. She looked at Eleanor, then back at Mara, as if trying to decide whether this waitress understood who she was dealing with. "This is none of your business," she snapped. "Step aside." "It became my business the moment you raised your hand in my diner," Mara replied. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. There was something in the way she stood, unmoving, that made it clear she would not step aside. The diner manager, a heavy-set man named Gary, came rushing out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron. "What is going on here?" he demanded, looking between the two women and the small crowd that had gathered. "She attacked a customer," Mara said, gesturing to Eleanor, who still had not moved from her seat. "I stopped her." Priscilla's face flushed red. She looked around at the staring customers, at the phones that were now being quietly lifted to record the scene, and something in her expression shifted from anger to calculation. She smoothed the front of her expensive coat and straightened her shoulders. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, her voice suddenly polished and light, as though she had not just tried to strike a stranger in public. "I was simply upset. Family matters. It happens." "Family matters don't give you the right to hit someone," Mara said. Gary stepped forward, his voice firm. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." Priscilla's jaw tightened, but she did not argue further. She cast one last look at Eleanor, a look that carried more warning than apology, and then turned on her heel and walked out, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. The bell above the door rang as she left, and the diner seemed to exhale all at once. Only then did Mara turn to check on Eleanor. The older woman's hands were trembling slightly, though she tried to hide it by folding them together on the table. She looked to be in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back neatly, and clothes that, though understated, were clearly of fine quality. There was a quiet dignity about her, even in this moment of shock. "Are you hurt?" Mara asked, crouching slightly beside the booth. Eleanor shook her head. "No, dear. Thanks to you." She looked at Mara's cheek, which had already begun to redden. "But you are. I am so sorry. You should not have done that." "I couldn't just watch," Mara said simply. "Nobody deserves to be hit, especially not for no reason." Eleanor studied her for a long moment, her sharp eyes taking in every detail, from the simple ponytail, to the worn sneakers, to the name tag pinned crookedly to her uniform. "Mara," she read aloud. "That's your name?" "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you, Mara. I mean that with my whole heart." Eleanor's voice trembled slightly, though whether from the shock of the moment or something deeper, Mara could not tell. Most people would have looked away. You didn't. Mara offered a small, tired smile. "I've been on the receiving end of unfairness before. I know what it feels like to have no one step in." She straightened up and reached for a napkin from the dispenser on the table, gently offering it to Eleanor, whose eyes had grown misty. "Would you like some water? Or something stronger? Like tea?" "Tea would be lovely," Eleanor said, dabbing at her eyes. As Mara walked back toward the counter, the other customers slowly returned to their meals, though the murmurs of the encounter continued to ripple through the diner. Gary caught Mara's arm gently as she passed. "You all right?" he asked, concern etched across his face. "I'm fine," Mara said, though her cheek still throbbed. "Just get me a cold cloth and a cup of tea, would you?" Gary nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. Mara took a moment to lean against the counter, her heart finally catching up with what her body had already done. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline fading and leaving something closer to disbelief in its place. She had acted without thinking, the way she always did when she saw someone being hurt. It was a trait her mother used to call reckless kindness, the kind that got you in trouble more often than it got you thanked. She glanced over at the booth where Eleanor sat, still composing herself. There was something about the woman that felt different from the usual customers who came through the diner. It wasn't just her clothes or her manner of speaking. It was the way people outside seemed to be watching. Mara had noticed, just before the confrontation, a sleek black car parked across the street, its windows tinted so dark that she could not see inside. She had thought nothing of it at the time, assuming it belonged to someone waiting for a delivery or a meeting nearby. Now she wondered. When Gary returned with the tea and a cold cloth wrapped in a napkin, Mara pressed the cloth gently against her cheek and carried the tea over to Eleanor's table. "Here you go," she said, setting the cup down carefully. "On the house?" "Absolutely not," Eleanor said, though her tone was warm rather than sharp. "I insist on paying, and more than that, I insist on properly thanking you once I've collected myself." Mara waved a hand. "You don't have to do anything. I just did what anyone should have done." "Not anyone would have," Eleanor said quietly, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "Believe me, in my experience, very few people are willing to put themselves at risk for someone they've never met." Mara sat down across from her, briefly setting aside her duties, since the dinner rush had not yet begun, and Gary seemed content to let her take a moment. "Can I ask," Mara said carefully, "who that woman was? She seemed to know you." Eleanor's expression clouded slightly. "An unfortunate connection to my family. It is a long and complicated story, one that I would rather not burden you with tonight." "Fair enough," Mara said, respecting the boundary. "I hope she doesn't come back." "So do I," Eleanor murmured, more to herself than to Mara. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, the diner's ordinary sounds returning around them, the clink of dishes, the hum of the old refrigerator behind the counter, the quiet chatter of the remaining customers. Eleanor took slow sips of her tea, her composure gradually returning, though there remained a shadow of worry behind her eyes. "Tell me about yourself, Mara," Eleanor said eventually, "if you don't mind me asking." Mara shrugged lightly. "Not much to tell. I've worked here for almost 3 years. Before that, I was in school, but I had to stop when my brother got sick. I work here most nights to help cover his treatment." Eleanor's eyes softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry to hear that. Is he all right?" "He's stable for now," Mara said. "It's a long process, but we're managing." "That takes real strength," Eleanor said. "Both the illness and the work you do to support him." "It's just what you do for family," Mara replied simply. Eleanor nodded slowly, as though turning something over in her mind, some thought she was not yet ready to share. "You remind me of someone," she said after a pause. "Someone I care about very much, though he would likely never admit that he shares your kind of courage." Mara laughed softly. "High praise, whoever he is." "You have no idea," Eleanor said, a small, knowing smile crossing her lips for the first time since the incident. Before Mara could ask what she meant, the bell above the diner door rang again. This time, it was not Priscilla returning, but 2 men in dark suits who entered with quiet, purposeful steps. They scanned the room briefly, before their eyes landed on Eleanor, and they approached the booth with a kind of respectful urgency that made the remaining customers glance up in curiosity. "Mrs. Cade," one of the men said quietly, "we came as soon as we heard. Are you all right?" Eleanor waved a hand calmly. "I am fine, thanks to this young woman." She gestured to Mara. "This is Mara." She stopped Priscilla before she could do any real harm. The 2 men exchanged a glance, something unreadable passing between them, before one of them nodded toward Mara with clear respect. "Thank you," he said simply, though there was weight behind the words that suggested more than simple politeness. Mara felt a flicker of unease settle in her stomach. The way the men addressed Eleanor, with careful formality, the way they had arrived so quickly after the incident, as though they had been alerted the moment something went wrong, told her this was no ordinary family. She thought again of the black car parked outside, and wondered how long it had been there, and why. "I should get back to work," Mara said, standing carefully, sensing that this conversation was moving into territory she did not yet understand, and perhaps was not meant to be part of. "Of course," Eleanor said, though her eyes lingered on Mara with an expression of quiet determination. "But Mara, before you go, I would like to see you again, if you are willing." There is more I would like to say to you, and I believe there is someone who would want to thank you personally as well." Mara hesitated, unsure how to respond to such an unusual request from someone she barely knew. Still, there was something in Eleanor's eyes, a sincerity that could not be faked, that made her nod. "Of course, ma'am. I'm usually here most evenings." "I will find you," Eleanor said, and there was something almost like relief in her voice, as if a decision had been made that mattered more than Mara could understand. As Eleanor rose from the booth, supported gently by one of the men in suits, she paused and turned back to Mara one final time. "You did something very brave tonight," she said. "Braver than you know. Please be careful in the days ahead. Not everyone will see what you did as a kindness." The words lingered strangely in the air, after Eleanor and her companions left the diner, climbing into the black car that pulled away smoothly into the evening traffic. Mara stood by the window, watching the taillights disappear down the street, her cheek still tender from the slap, her mind racing with questions she could not yet answer. Gary approached from behind the counter, following her gaze. "You know who that was?" he asked, a strange note of awe in his voice. "No," Mara admitted. "Should I?" Gary shook his head slowly. "I don't know for sure, but that car, and the way those men talked to her, that's not just any family walking into our diner." He paused, looking at Mara with something between concern and curiosity. "Whatever you just got yourself into, kid, I hope you know what you're doing." Mara looked back out the window at the empty street, the events of the last few minutes replaying in her mind, from the raised hand, to the impact of the slap, to the strange weight in Eleanor's parting words. She did not know what she had gotten herself into. She only knew that something had shifted, quietly and irreversibly, the moment she stepped between two strangers to stop an act of harm. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of orders and small talk, though her mind remained elsewhere, circling back again and again, to the strange warmth in Eleanor's eyes, and the strange watchfulness of the men who had come for her. When Mara finally clocked out for the night and stepped outside into the cool evening air, she noticed something that made her stomach tighten. Parked quietly across the street, in nearly the same spot as before, sat another black car, its windows just as dark, its engine running softly in the night. She could not tell if it was watching her, protecting her, or simply a coincidence of the neighborhood, but as she walked toward the bus stop, the feeling of being watched followed her the entire way, settling into her chest, like a question she could not yet find the courage to answer. Whatever had begun tonight in that small roadside diner, she understood, with a certainty that surprised her, that it was only the beginning. 2 days passed before Eleanor returned, and in that time Mara found herself glancing toward the door of the diner, more often than she cared to admit. She told herself it was simple curiosity, nothing more, yet she could not shake the memory of Eleanor's parting words, the warning wrapped inside gratitude. On the third evening, just as the dinner rush was beginning to slow, the bell above the door rang, and Eleanor stepped inside, this time dressed in a soft gray coat, her silver hair perfectly arranged, her expression calm but purposeful. She was not alone. Beside her walked a man Mara had never seen before, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes so sharp they seemed to take in the entire diner in a single glance. He wore a simple dark coat, nothing flashy, yet there was an unmistakable authority in the way he carried himself, the kind of presence that made conversations quiet, without a single word being spoken. Mara felt an odd tightening in her chest as the two of them approached the counter. "Mara," Eleanor said warmly, "I hope you don't mind us stopping by again." "Not at all," Mara replied, glancing briefly at the man beside her, before returning her attention to Eleanor. "Please, sit wherever you'd like." Eleanor gestured toward a booth near the window, the same one where the confrontation with Priscilla had taken place. The man followed without comment, his eyes lingering on Mara for a moment longer than necessary, as though he were measuring something about her that could not be seen with a simple glance. Once they were seated, Eleanor folded her hands together and looked at Mara with unmistakable warmth. "I wanted to properly introduce you," she said, gesturing to the man beside her. "This is my son. He insisted on coming to meet the woman who stepped in for me." The man extended a hand, his grip firm, but not unkind. "Thank you," he said simply. His voice was low and even, carrying the same quiet authority as his posture. "What you did for my mother was not a small thing." "I only did what felt right," Mara said, feeling suddenly conscious of her worn uniform, and the faint bruise still visible on her cheek. Anyone would have done the same. Not everyone would have, he replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. Most people look away from trouble. You stepped into it. Mara did not know how to respond to such directness, so she simply nodded and asked if they would like something to drink. Eleanor ordered tea again, and the man asked for black coffee, his eyes following Mara as she moved toward the counter to prepare their order. She could feel the weight of his attention, even with her back turned, and it unsettled her, in a way she could not quite name. When she returned with the drinks, Eleanor patted the seat beside her, inviting Mara to sit for a few minutes if her shift allowed. Mara glanced toward Gary, who waved a hand from behind the counter, silently granting her permission to take a short break. She slid into the booth across from the two of them, folding her hands in her lap. I want to be honest with you, Eleanor began, glancing briefly at her son before continuing. The woman who came into the diner 2 nights ago, Priscilla, is not simply an acquaintance who lost her temper. She has been trying to insert herself into our family, for reasons that go far beyond affection. Mara listened carefully, sensing the seriousness behind Eleanor's calm words. What kind of reasons? Business, the man said flatly. My family runs a company that many people want a piece of, whether through honest means or otherwise. Priscilla believed that by marrying into our family, she could gain access to decisions that are not hers to make. She was angry with your mother because, Mara trailed off, unsure how far she was allowed to ask. Because I refused to stay silent about what I discovered, Eleanor finished quietly. I found evidence that she was manipulating financial records connected to our company, using a false engagement to gain trust and access. When I confronted her privately, she followed me to make sure I would not speak of it publicly. That is when you found us. Mara sat back slightly, absorbing the weight of what she was hearing. This was no ordinary family dispute. There was real danger tucked inside the calm words Eleanor used to describe it. I had no idea, she said honestly. I just saw someone about to hurt you. I didn't think about anything beyond that. That is precisely why we are here, the man said, leaning forward slightly. You acted without calculation, without expecting anything in return. That kind of instinct is rare, and in my experience, valuable. There was something in the way he said valuable that made Mara feel like more than simple gratitude was being extended toward her, though she could not yet name what it might be. I appreciate you both coming to explain, she said carefully, but I want to be clear that I don't expect anything from you. I didn't help because I wanted a reward. We understand that, Eleanor said gently, and it is precisely why we feel comfortable trusting you with this information. But I must also warn you, as I did before, Priscilla does not take failure lightly. She may see you as an obstacle now, someone who interfered with her plans in a way she will not easily forgive. A small chill ran through Mara at those words. Are you saying she might come after me? It is possible, the man said honestly. I do not say this to frighten you, but because you deserve to know the truth of the situation you have stepped into. If she attempts anything, I want you to contact us immediately. He reached into his coat and produced a plain white card with only a phone number printed on it. No name, no company logo. This number will reach my assistant directly, day or night. Mara stared at the card for a long moment before taking it, folding it carefully into her apron pocket. Thank you, she said, though I hope it doesn't come to that. So do I, Eleanor said softly, reaching over to squeeze Mara's hand briefly. You have already done more for this family than you realize. Please allow us to look out for you in return, even in small ways. The conversation shifted after that, growing lighter, as Eleanor asked about Mara's brother and his condition, listening with genuine interest, rather than polite obligation. The man remained mostly quiet, observing more than speaking, though Mara noticed the way his expression softened slightly whenever Eleanor spoke of her own late husband, a detail that slipped out during the conversation, and seemed to carry old grief still tender beneath the surface. As the evening wore on and other customers began to fill the diner, Mara reluctantly excused herself to return to work, promising to check on them if they needed anything further. Before she walked away, the man spoke once more, his voice quiet but carrying easily across the short distance between them. You should know, he said, that gestures like yours do not go unnoticed in my world. Whatever happens next, know that you have earned more respect than you might realize. Mara nodded, unsure how to respond to such weighted words, and turned back to her duties, weaving between tables with practiced ease, even as her mind buzzed with questions. Who was this family truly? What kind of company inspired such careful secrecy, such quiet protection? And why did she feel, despite every instinct telling her to be cautious, an inexplicable sense of safety whenever Eleanor's eyes met hers? Near the end of the night, as Eleanor and her son prepared to leave, Eleanor paused by the door and turned back one final time. "There is a dinner," she said, "at our family home, this coming weekend. I would very much like for you to attend, if you are willing. There are others who would like to properly thank you as well." Mara hesitated, the idea of stepping into a world so clearly different from her own, filling her with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Still, she found herself nodding. "I would be honored," she said. "Wonderful," Eleanor said, her eyes brightening with genuine warmth. "I will send a car for you Saturday evening." As the two of them stepped out into the night, Mara watched through the window as they climbed into the same black car she had seen parked outside days before, the one whose windows never allowed a glimpse inside. She thought of the plain white card tucked into her apron, of the quiet authority in the man's voice, of Eleanor's warning about Priscilla's temper. Later that night, walking home under the dim glow of streetlights, Mara replayed the conversation over and over, trying to make sense of the pieces that did not quite fit together. A family with enough power to warrant silent men in suits, enough wealth to keep unmarked cars idling outside diners, enough secrecy to withhold even a name. And yet, despite everything, Eleanor's kindness had felt entirely real, untouched by the coldness that so often accompanied wealth and power. As she turned the corner toward her apartment, a flicker of movement in her peripheral vision made her pause. A figure stood beneath a street lamp across the road, still and watching, too far away to make out clearly in the darkness. Mara's pulse quickened, her hand instinctively moving toward the apron pocket where the white card was tucked safely away. When she looked again, the figure was gone, swallowed by shadow and distance, leaving her uncertain whether it had been Priscilla, one of Eleanor's men keeping watch, or simply her own nerves playing tricks in the dark. Either way, she understood with growing certainty that the quiet, ordinary life she had built for herself was beginning to shift into something far larger and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The invitation to the Cade estate arrived exactly as promised, a sleek black car pulling up outside Mara's apartment building on Saturday evening, precisely on time. She had spent the better part of the afternoon deciding what to wear, eventually settling on a simple navy dress that she had bought for her brother's school graduation years ago, the nicest thing she owned. As the car glided through streets she rarely traveled, moving from cracked sidewalks and tired storefronts into wide, tree-lined avenues, Mara felt increasingly aware of how far she was stepping outside the boundaries of her ordinary life. The estate itself took her breath away, though not simply because of its size. Stone walls rose gracefully behind iron gates that opened without a sound, revealing a long driveway lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and soft golden lighting. The house at the end of the drive looked less like a home and more like something from a history book, elegant and imposing at once. Mara stepped out of the car slowly, smoothing the front of her dress, trying to steady the nervous flutter in her chest. Eleanor greeted her at the door personally, a warm smile lighting her face as she took both of Mara's hands in her own. "You came," she said, as though there had been any doubt. "Of course," Mara replied. "Thank you for having me." "The thanks belongs entirely to you," Eleanor said, guiding her inside. The interior of the house was just as striking as its exterior, with high ceilings and soft lighting that made everything feel warm rather than cold, despite the clear wealth surrounding her. Mara tried not to stare too openly at the paintings lining the hallway or the polished floors beneath her feet, though it was difficult not to notice every detail of a world so different from her own small apartment. Dinner was held in a smaller dining room, rather than the grand hall Mara had briefly glimpsed on the way in. Something Eleanor explained was meant to keep the evening intimate, rather than overwhelming. Only a handful of people were present, including Eleanor's son, whom Mara now understood was known in certain circles as a man of significant influence, though his title remained something she still did not fully grasp. He greeted her with a polite nod as she took her seat, his expression unreadable in the way she remembered from the diner. "I'm glad you came," he said simply. "Thank you for inviting me," Mara replied, settling into her chair, painfully aware of the gap between the plain fork in her hand and the elaborate silverware laid out before her. Conversation over dinner remained light at first, touching on simple topics such as the food, the weather, and pleasant memories Eleanor shared about the estate's garden, which she tended personally despite having staff who could easily do it for her. Mara found herself relaxing slowly, comforted by Eleanor's easy warmth and the way she made an effort to include her in every exchange, even when the topics drifted toward matters of the family business that Mara did not fully understand. It was during dessert that the tone shifted. A member of the household staff entered quietly and murmured something to the man at the head of the table, whose expression darkened instantly. He excused himself briefly, stepping into the hallway, and returned only a few minutes later, his jaw tight with restrained anger. "What is it?" Eleanor asked, setting down her spoon. "Priscilla," he said simply. "She has been spreading claims to members of the board, suggesting that the accusations against her were fabricated, that you," he glanced at his mother, "invented the entire story out of jealousy over her relationship with me." Eleanor's face paled slightly, though she maintained her composure. "That is absurd. I have evidence." "I know," he said, his voice hardening. "But evidence takes time to present properly, and she is counting on causing enough doubt in the meantime to protect herself." Mara sat quietly, feeling like an outsider to a conversation that clearly ran far deeper than what she had witnessed in the diner. Still, she could not help but ask, "Is there anything I can do to help?" Both Eleanor and her son turned to look at her, surprise flickering across their faces at the offer. "You have already done more than enough," Eleanor said gently. "This is not something you should have to worry about." "I stepped into it the moment I stopped that slap," Mara said quietly. "I don't mind being involved, if it helps." The man studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his sharp eyes, an unspoken respect deepening in his expression. "There may come a time," he said slowly, "when your account of that night could matter. If Priscilla continues to deny what happened in front of witnesses, would you be willing to speak on my mother's behalf, if it becomes necessary?" "Of course," Mara said without hesitation. "I saw what happened. I won't pretend otherwise." Eleanor reached over and squeezed Mara's hand gratefully, though worry still lingered in her eyes. "Thank you, dear. I only hope it does not come to that. Priscilla is not someone who accepts defeat gracefully." The rest of the evening passed with a quieter undertone, the earlier warmth tempered by the looming shadow of Priscilla's accusations. As the dinner drew to a close, Eleanor walked Mara to the door personally, her expression thoughtful. "I want you to be careful," she said, echoing the same warning from days before. "Priscilla has resources and connections that most people underestimate. If she believes you are a threat to her plans, she may act in ways that are difficult to predict." "I'll be careful," Mara promised, though a flicker of unease settled in her stomach at the seriousness in Eleanor's tone. As the car carried her home through the quiet night streets, Mara stared out the window, replaying the evening in her mind. The house, the dinner, the tension that had crept into the room the moment Priscilla's name was mentioned, all of it felt like pieces of a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. She thought of the man's sharp eyes studying her across the table, the quiet weight of his gratitude, the unspoken sense that stepping into this family's orbit meant stepping into something far larger than a simple act of kindness. When she finally arrived home, exhaustion settling deep into her bones, she noticed something odd sitting on the small table just inside her apartment door. A folded piece of paper, slipped somehow beneath the entrance, despite the building's locked main door. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked it up and unfolded it, her eyes scanning the short, typed message inside. "You should have minded your own business. This is your only warning." Mara's breath caught in her throat. She looked around her small apartment, checking the windows and door locks twice, her heart hammering against her ribs. Whoever had left this message had gotten close enough to slip it directly into her home, a fact that chilled her far more than the words themselves. She remembered the plain white card tucked into her coat pocket and, with trembling fingers, dialed the number written on it. The call was answered on the second ring by a calm, professional voice. "This is Daniel, assistant to Mr. Cade. How can I help you?" "My name is Mara," she said, her voice shakier than she intended. "I was told to call this number if something happened. I think someone left me a threatening note." There was a brief pause before Daniel replied, his tone shifting to something more urgent. "Please stay where you are, and keep your doors locked. Someone will be there within 15 minutes. True to his word, a car arrived outside Mara's building in just under 15 minutes, and to her surprise, it was not simply hired security who stepped out, but Eleanor's son himself. his expression tight with concern as he climbed the stairs to her apartment 2 at a time. He examined the note carefully once she let him inside, his jaw tightening further as he read the words. "This is my fault," he said quietly. "I should have anticipated that she might target you directly." "I'm all right," Mara said, though her voice trembled slightly. "Just shaken." "You shouldn't have to deal with this," he said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her chest tighten. "I am going to arrange for someone to keep watch near your building until we resolve this situation properly." Mara wanted to protest, to insist she could handle things on her own, but the memory of the folded note sitting ominously on her table kept the words from forming. "Thank you," she said instead, quietly grateful despite herself. He lingered a moment longer than necessary before turning to leave, his expression softening slightly as he looked back at her. "You did not ask for any of this," he said, "and yet you have handled every part of it with more grace than most people twice your age. I will make sure Priscilla answers for what she has done, to my mother, and now to you." As the door closed behind him, and the sound of his car faded into the night, Mara sank onto her small couch, staring at the folded note still resting on the table. Whatever quiet, simple life she had built for herself was now undeniably entangled with a world of wealth, power, and danger, far beyond anything she had ever imagined, and there was no clear path back to the way things had been before. Sleep did not come easily that night. Mara lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling of her small bedroom, the folded note still sitting on the table in the other room like a silent, unwelcome guest. Every creak of the old building made her tense. Every distant car engine made her sit up and listen for footsteps outside her door. By the time morning light finally crept through her curtains, she felt more exhausted than if she had not slept at all. She dragged herself through her morning routine mechanically, checking her phone twice to make sure there had been no further messages, before heading to the diner for her shift. Gary noticed the shadows beneath her eyes the moment she walked in, and pulled her aside, before she could clock in. "You look like you haven't slept," he said, concern evident in his voice. "Everything all right?" Mara hesitated, unsure how much to share. "Just a rough night," she said finally. "I'll be fine." Gary studied her for a moment longer, clearly unconvinced, but he did not press further, simply patting her shoulder before returning to the kitchen. Mara took a steadying breath and began her shift, though her eyes kept drifting toward the window, half expecting to see either the black car of Eleanor's family or something far less welcome parked across the street. Around midday, as the lunch rush began to slow, a woman Mara did not recognize walked into the diner and took a seat near the counter. She was younger than Eleanor, perhaps in her 30s, with sharp features and an air of quiet confidence that immediately put Mara on alert. When she ordered simply a coffee, her eyes lingered on Mara a moment too long, studying her with an intensity that felt anything but casual. "You're Mara," the woman said, once Mara set the coffee down in front of her. It was not a question. Mara's guard rose instantly. "Can I help you with something?" "My name is Claire," the woman said smoothly. "I work with Priscilla." The mention of that name sent a jolt of tension through Mara's body, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. "I don't have anything to say to you," she said evenly, turning to walk away. "Wait," Claire said, her voice softening slightly, though Mara remained wary. "I'm not here to threaten you. Quite the opposite, actually. I think what Priscilla is doing is wrong, and I want to help stop it." Mara paused, studying the woman carefully, trying to gauge whether this was genuine or another attempt at manipulation. "Why should I believe you?" Claire glanced around the diner briefly, ensuring no one else was within earshot, before lowering her voice further. "I used to work for Priscilla's family, handling some of their financial records. I have seen firsthand what she has been doing to try to gain access to the Cade Company's assets. It isn't just manipulation of trust, it's outright fraud, hidden behind layers of shell companies and false partnerships." Mara's pulse quickened at the seriousness in Claire's voice. "Why come to me? Why not go to the Cade family directly?" "Because Priscilla is watching them closely," Claire said. "She expects them to gather evidence and prepare for a confrontation. She does not expect someone like you, someone she considers unimportant, to be the one holding a piece of the puzzle she cannot control." "What piece?" Mara asked, confusion knitting her brow. Claire reached into her bag and produced a small folder, sliding it carefully across the counter. "Copies of documents showing the shell companies Priscilla used to funnel funds meant for false partnerships. If this reaches the right people, it could unravel everything she has built. But I need someone Priscilla does not suspect to deliver it safely. Mara stared at the folder, her mind racing. Why would I trust this? For all I know, you could be working with her, setting some kind of trap. Claire's expression grew serious. I understand your hesitation, but ask yourself this. If I wanted to trap you, would I hand you documents in a public diner where anyone could witness the exchange? I am taking a significant risk simply by being here. Mara considered this carefully, the pieces of Claire's argument settling logically into place, despite the uncertainty still gnawing at her chest. Even if I believe you, she said slowly, why should I be the one to deliver something this important? I have no connection to any of this beyond a single incident in this diner. Because you already have their trust, Claire said simply, and because you have shown, through your own actions, that you cannot be bought or intimidated easily. Priscilla underestimates people like you. That makes you valuable in ways you may not fully realize. After a long moment of hesitation, Mara reached out and took the folder, tucking it carefully beneath the counter. I'll think about what to do with this, she said finally, but I'm not making any promises. That's all I ask, Claire said, standing and leaving a few bills on the counter for her coffee. Before she left, she paused and looked back at Mara one final time. Be careful. If Priscilla discovers I came to you, there will be consequences for both of us. As Claire disappeared out the door, Mara stood frozen for a moment, staring at the folder hidden beneath the counter, uncertain whether she had just been handed a lifeline or led further into a trap she could not yet see clearly. She glanced around the diner, half expecting someone to be watching, before quietly slipping the folder into her bag to examine later, away from prying eyes. That evening, once her shift ended, Mara returned home and locked her door carefully before sitting down at her small kitchen table and opening the folder Claire had given her. Inside were pages of financial records, spreadsheets filled with numbers she did not fully understand, but even her limited knowledge could see patterns that seemed deliberately obscured, transactions routed through companies with vague, unfamiliar names. She was still poring over the documents when her phone rang, the screen displaying an unknown number. Her heart skipped nervously as she answered. Mara, came Eleanor's son's voice, tense and urgent. Are you all right? Daniel mentioned someone approached you at the diner today. Mara blinked in surprise. How did you know that? We have people keeping an eye on the diner, given the threat you received, he explained. One of them mentioned a woman meeting with you. Someone unfamiliar. Mara hesitated, glancing at the folder spread across her table. She said her name was Claire. She claimed to have worked for Priscilla's family and gave me documents that she says prove Priscilla has been committing fraud. There was a pause on the other end of the line before he spoke again, his voice careful. Do you have those documents with you now? Yes, Mara said. I haven't had a chance to fully review them, but they look serious. I need to see them, he said. Would you be willing to bring them to the estate, or should I send someone to collect them? Mara considered the request, the weight of the folder suddenly feeling heavier than before. I can bring them myself, she said finally. I would rather see this through personally, given everything that has already happened. I'll send a car within the hour, he said. And Mara, thank you. I know this is far more than you ever expected to be part of. I stopped expecting things to make sense the moment I stepped between you and Priscilla, Mara replied, a small, tired laugh escaping her, despite the tension of the situation. When the car arrived, Mara gathered the folder carefully and stepped outside, glancing instinctively toward the shadows of the street before climbing inside. The drive to the estate felt longer this time, her mind turning over every possibility, every risk hidden within the documents she carried. When she arrived, Eleanor's son was waiting at the door personally, his expression a careful mixture of gratitude and concern as he ushered her inside. They sat together in a private study, the folder spread across a large wooden desk as he examined each page with sharp, focused attention. Mara watched his expression shift from concentration to quiet fury as he uncovered pattern after pattern of manipulation hidden within the numbers. This is more than enough, he said finally, closing the folder carefully. This will be enough to expose everything she has been trying to hide. What will you do with it? Mara asked. I will need to verify the authenticity of these records carefully, he said. But if they hold up, this could end her attempts to infiltrate our company for good. He looked up at Mara, his expression softening slightly. You continue to surprise me, Mara. First an act of instinct, and now this. I just wanted to help, Mara said simply, especially after that note. His jaw tightened at the mention of the threat. I promise you, once this is resolved, she will not be in a position to threaten anyone again. As Mara prepared to leave, exhaustion from the long day finally settling over her, he walked her to the door personally once more, his hand resting briefly against hers, as he thanked her again. Get some rest, he said gently. You have done more than anyone could have asked. Driving home through the quiet night, Mara allowed herself a small measure of relief, though the uncertainty of what still lay ahead lingered heavily in her chest. The documents were now in careful hands, but Priscilla remained unpredictable, and the danger she represented had not yet fully passed. Days passed quietly after Mara delivered the folder, though the calm did little to ease the tension that had settled permanently into her shoulders. She continued her shifts at the diner, checking the street outside more often than usual, still aware of the unmarked car that occasionally idled nearby, a silent reminder that she was being watched over, whether she wanted it or not. It was on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the diner nearly empty between the lunch and dinner rush, that Priscilla walked through the door again. This time, there was no fury in her expression, no raised hand or shouted accusations. Instead, she wore a calm, calculated smile that unsettled Mara far more than the anger had. Mara, Priscilla said smoothly, sliding into a booth near the window. We should talk. Mara approached cautiously, her guard fully raised. I don't think we have anything to discuss. Oh, I think we do, Priscilla said, gesturing for Mara to sit across from her. When Mara hesitated, Priscilla continued anyway. You've become quite involved in matters that don't concern you. I understand you've been carrying documents on behalf of the Cade family. Mara kept her expression carefully neutral, refusing to confirm or deny anything. I don't know what you're talking about. Priscilla's smile sharpened. Let's not pretend, shall we? I know about Claire's little visit. I know what she gave you. And I know you delivered it personally to my former fiancé. She leaned forward slightly. I'm here to offer you a chance to reconsider your involvement before things become truly unpleasant for you. Is that a threat? Mara asked, her voice steady despite the unease coiling in her stomach. Call it a friendly warning, Priscilla said. You have no idea the kind of resources my family commands. Your brother's medical care, for instance, relies heavily on certain insurance arrangements that could easily become complicated if the wrong information were to reach the wrong people. Mara's blood ran cold at the mention of her brother. Leave him out of this, she said, her voice hardening. That depends entirely on you, Priscilla said, her tone light despite the venom hidden beneath it. Return the documents. Tell the Cade family you made a mistake, that Claire pressured you into taking something you didn't understand, and this can all disappear quietly. Refuse, and I promise you, things will become significantly harder for you and your brother both. Mara's hands clenched into fists beneath the table, anger and fear warring within her. You're despicable, she said quietly. Threatening a sick person to protect your own lies. Priscilla shrugged elegantly, unbothered by the accusation. I do what is necessary to protect what is mine. You would do well to remember that before making any further decisions. Without another word, Priscilla rose from the booth and walked out of the diner, leaving Mara sitting frozen in place, her heart pounding furiously against her ribs. Gary, who had been watching from behind the counter, approached carefully once Priscilla was gone. You all right? He asked. That woman looked like trouble. She is, Mara said, her voice shaking slightly. I need to make a call. She retreated to the small break room in the back of the diner and dialed the number on the white card with trembling fingers. Daniel answered promptly, and Mara relayed the conversation with Priscilla as calmly as she could manage, though her voice cracked slightly when she mentioned the threat against her brother. I will inform Mr. Cade immediately, Daniel said, his tone serious. Please stay calm. We will not allow her to follow through on that threat. Within the hour, Eleanor's son arrived at the diner personally, his expression thunderous, as Mara recounted the conversation in full detail. She threatened your brother's care directly? He asked, his voice low and controlled, though fury simmered clearly beneath the surface. Yes, Mara said. She said she could complicate his insurance arrangements if I didn't return the documents and claim Claire pressured me into taking something I didn't understand. He was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight, before he spoke again. This confirms exactly what we needed. She is willing to threaten innocent people to protect herself. which only strengthens the case against her. He looked at Mara carefully. I promise you, your brother's care will not be affected. I will personally ensure that whatever arrangements exist remain secure, regardless of anything Priscilla attempts. Thank you, Mara said, relief washing through her despite the lingering fear. I also think it would be wise, he continued, for you to stay somewhere more secure for the time being. Priscilla has shown she is willing to escalate matters when she feels cornered, and I do not want you facing that risk alone. Mara hesitated, the idea of leaving her small apartment feeling like an admission that things had truly spiraled beyond her control. I don't want to run from my own home, she said finally. I understand, he said, respecting her hesitation. But please allow additional security to remain nearby, at least until this situation is fully resolved. Mara agreed reluctantly, though the following days brought a strange, uneasy rhythm to her life, one where ordinary tasks like grocery shopping or walking to the bus stop were shadowed by an awareness of unseen watchers, both protective and threatening, moving unseen around her. Meanwhile, word began to spread quietly within certain business circles that Priscilla's engagement to the Cade family had ended under mysterious and unfavorable circumstances. Whispers of financial impropriety began to circulate, though nothing had yet been made fully public. Mara learned through occasional updates from Daniel that the documents she had delivered were being carefully verified by forensic accountants, building a case strong enough to withstand any counterattack Priscilla might attempt. A week after the confrontation at the diner, Mara received an unexpected visit from Eleanor herself, who arrived alone this time, her expression a careful mixture of gratitude and concern. I wanted to see you personally, Eleanor said, settling into the familiar booth by the window. To thank you again, and to apologize for the danger you have been placed in because of our family's troubles. You don't need to apologize, Mara said. I chose to get involved. Perhaps, Eleanor said gently, but that does not mean the burden should fall entirely on your shoulders. I want you to know that regardless of how this situation resolves, our family will ensure your safety and your brother's well-being remain protected. Mara felt a lump form in her throat at the genuine warmth behind Eleanor's words. Thank you, she said quietly. It means more than you know. Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed her hand gently. You have shown more courage in these past weeks than most people demonstrate in a lifetime. Whatever happens next, please know that you have earned a permanent place in this family's regard. As Eleanor prepared to leave, she paused once more by the door, her expression thoughtful. There will be a gathering soon, she said, an event where many important figures from the company will be present. I suspect matters concerning Priscilla will come to a head there. I would like you to attend, if you are willing, though I understand if you would rather stay away from further danger. Mara considered the invitation carefully, weighing the fear still lingering from Priscilla's threats against the fierce, unexpected sense of loyalty she had developed toward Eleanor and her family over these past weeks. I'll be there, she said finally. I want to see this through. Eleanor's eyes softened with pride and gratitude. Then I will make sure you have proper support and safety throughout the evening. Thank you, Mara. Truly. As Eleanor left the diner, Mara stood by the window once more, watching the black car pull away into the evening traffic, her mind turning over the gathering that lay ahead. Whatever confrontation awaited at that event, she understood that it would likely mark the turning point of everything that had unfolded since the night she stepped between a raised hand and an innocent woman's face. The quiet waitress who had once moved unnoticed through her ordinary life was now standing at the center of a conflict far larger than she ever could have imagined, and there was no turning back now. In the days leading up to the gathering, Mara learned far more about the depth of Priscilla's deception than she had ever anticipated. Daniel visited her personally one evening, carrying a slim folder that he explained contained a summary of everything the forensic accountants had uncovered since receiving Claire's documents. It's worse than we initially thought, Daniel admitted, sliding the folder across the table in Mara's small apartment. Priscilla did not simply attempt to manipulate her way into the family through marriage. She created an elaborate network of shell companies, designed to slowly siphon funds from various company projects, funneling them into accounts controlled by associates loyal only to her. Mara scanned the summary carefully, her understanding of financial matters limited, but the scale of the deception clear even to her untrained eye. How long has she been doing this? Nearly 2 years, Daniel said grimly. She approached Mr. Cade initially, through a mutual business associate, presenting herself as an investor interested in expanding the company's reach internationally. The relationship developed from there, and she used the trust gained through their engagement to gain access to sensitive financial systems. And Eleanor discovered this how? Mara asked. She noticed inconsistencies in reports during a routine review of the company's finances, Daniel explained. When she began asking questions, Priscilla grew increasingly defensive, eventually leading to the confrontation you witnessed at the diner. Mara closed the folder slowly, absorbing the full weight of what she was now involved in. What happens if this becomes public at the gathering? It will likely end her plans permanently, Daniel said. Mr. Cade intends to present the evidence before the board and key investors, effectively severing any remaining influence she might hold within the company or its associated circles. Will she try something before then? Mara asked, unable to shake the memory of Priscilla's calm, calculated threats. Daniel's expression grew serious. It is likely. Desperation often makes people unpredictable. I would advise you to remain cautious in the days leading up to the event. True to Daniel's warning, the days that followed carried a persistent undercurrent of tension. Mara noticed subtle signs that she was being watched more closely than before. Strange cars idling a little too long near her apartment, unfamiliar faces appearing more frequently around the diner. She reported each occurrence to Daniel, who assured her that additional security had been arranged, though the reassurance did little to fully calm her nerves. 3 days before the gathering, Mara received a call from her brother's hospital, informing her that there had been an unexpected issue with his insurance coverage, a sudden and unexplained lapse that threatened to delay his ongoing treatment. Panic gripped her chest as she called Daniel immediately, her voice trembling as she explained the situation. "This is her doing," Daniel said grimly after a brief pause. "I will resolve this immediately. Please do not worry, Mara. Your brother's care will not be interrupted." True to his word, within hours, the issue was resolved, the insurance coverage reinstated without further explanation, though Mara understood clearly that Priscilla's reach extended further than she had initially realized, and that the woman was growing increasingly desperate as the gathering approached. The night before the event, Eleanor visited Mara personally, bringing with her a beautifully wrapped box that Mara opened hesitantly to find an elegant dress inside, simple, yet clearly expensive, in a deep shade of blue that Eleanor explained had reminded her of the ocean the moment she saw it. "I wanted you to feel confident tomorrow evening," Eleanor said gently. "Not because you need finery to prove your worth, but because I know how intimidating these gatherings can feel to those unfamiliar with them." Mara held the dress carefully, touched by the thoughtfulness behind the gift. "Thank you, Eleanor. Truly." "You have given so much already," Eleanor said. "Allow me this small gesture in return." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "Tomorrow will not be easy. Priscilla will likely attempt to defend herself publicly, perhaps even turn accusations back toward you or my family. I need you to remain strong, regardless of what she says." "I will," Mara promised, steadying herself with a deep breath. The following evening, Mara arrived at the grand hall where the gathering was held, the elegant blue dress fitting perfectly, giving her a quiet confidence she had not expected to feel amid such unfamiliar surroundings. The hall itself was filled with important figures from the company, investors, board members, and associates, all dressed in formal attire, their conversations hushed, yet charged with an undercurrent of anticipation, as though everyone present sensed that something significant was about to unfold. Eleanor's son found Mara shortly after her arrival, his expression grave despite the polished exterior he presented to the room. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I know how difficult this must be for you." "I want to see this through," Mara said firmly. "For your mother, and for everyone Priscilla has hurt along the way." He nodded, appreciation evident in his eyes, before leading her toward a quiet corner of the hall, where they could speak privately amid the growing crowd. "The evidence has been fully verified," he explained. "I intend to present it publicly tonight, before the board and key investors, to ensure there is no ambiguity about what has occurred." "Do you think she'll try to stop you?" Mara asked. "She will certainly try something," he admitted, "but I am prepared for whatever she attempts." As the evening progressed, Mara remained close to Eleanor, observing the unfamiliar rituals of wealth and business with careful attention, though her mind remained sharply focused on the tension simmering beneath the surface of polite conversation. She noticed Priscilla arrive fashionably late, dressed impeccably, her expression composed and confident, despite the storm she surely knew was approaching. Priscilla moved through the crowd with practiced grace, greeting familiar faces with warm smiles that betrayed nothing of the deception hidden beneath her polished exterior. When her eyes eventually found Mara across the room, her expression flickered briefly with cold calculation, before smoothing back into pleasant neutrality. The formal portion of the evening began with brief remarks from several board members, discussing the company's recent achievements and future plans. Mara felt her pulse quicken as Eleanor's son eventually rose to speak, the room quieting respectfully as he approached the small podium set up at the front of the hall. "Before we continue this evening," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room, "there is a matter I must address publicly, one that concerns the integrity of this company and the trust each of you have placed within it." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as he gestured for a projection screen to be lowered behind him, displaying the first of several documents Mara recognized from the folder Claire had given her weeks before. Priscilla's expression shifted instantly from composed confidence to poorly concealed alarm. "Over the past 2 years," he continued, his voice steady and unwavering, "funds meant for legitimate international expansion projects have been systematically diverted through a network of shell companies, ultimately benefiting individuals with no legitimate connection to this organization." The room erupted into hushed, urgent whispers as more documents appeared on the screen, each one methodically laying out the evidence of Priscilla's deception in clear, undeniable detail. Priscilla's face had gone pale, her earlier composure completely shattered as every eye in the room turned toward her. "This is absurd," Priscilla said loudly, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "These documents are fabricated, an attempt to discredit me, out of jealousy and personal grievance." "The documents have been independently verified by 3 separate forensic accounting firms," Eleanor's son replied calmly, his voice cutting cleanly through Priscilla's protest. "Additionally, I have a witness present tonight who can confirm the events that led to the discovery of this fraud." All eyes turned toward Mara, who felt her heart lurch violently at the sudden weight of attention. She rose slowly from her seat, steadying herself with a deep breath before speaking clearly enough for the room to hear. "I witnessed Priscilla attempt to strike Eleanor Cade in a public diner, after Eleanor discovered evidence of exactly this kind of fraud," Mara said, her voice growing steadier with each word. "I also received direct threats from Priscilla, both against myself and my brother, when I became involved in delivering evidence of her deception." Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Priscilla's face contorted with fury and desperation as she realized the full weight of the evidence now stacked irrevocably against her. "You have no idea what you have just done," she hissed toward Mara, though her voice lacked the earlier confidence that had once made her threats so chilling. "I know exactly what I've done," Mara replied evenly. "I told the truth." Security quietly approached Priscilla as murmurs of shock and anger spread through the gathered crowd, board members already exchanging urgent glances about the implications of what had just been revealed. As she was escorted from the hall, Priscilla shot one final venomous look toward Mara and Eleanor's son, though there was nothing left for her to say that could undo the damage now irreversibly done. As the hall slowly settled into a buzz of shocked conversation, Eleanor's son turned to Mara, his expression filled with quiet gratitude and something deeper that Mara could not quite name. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything." Mara offered a tired but genuine smile. "I told you I wanted to see this through." Little did she know, the consequences of this night's revelations were far from finished unfolding. In the weeks following the gathering, life seemed to settle into a strange new rhythm for Mara, one where the shadow of Priscilla's threats gradually receded, replaced by a growing sense of relief that the danger might finally be behind her. News of Priscilla's exposure spread quickly through business circles, her reputation crumbling swiftly as former associates distanced themselves from the scandal. Yet Mara soon learned that Priscilla was not someone who accepted defeat without one final, desperate attempt to reclaim what she had lost. It began subtly, with strange rumors circulating among Mara's co-workers at the diner, whispers suggesting that she had accepted money from the Cade family in exchange for false testimony against Priscilla. Gary approached her one afternoon, his expression troubled, holding up his phone to show her a social media post, accusing her of exactly that, complete with a fabricated screenshot of a supposed bank transfer. "This isn't true, is it?" Gary asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Of course not, Mara said, anger flaring hot in her chest as she examined the fake screenshot. This is completely fabricated. I figured as much, Gary said. But it's spreading fast. People are starting to ask questions. Mara immediately contacted Daniel, who confirmed her suspicions within the hour. Priscilla is behind this, he said grimly. Even after everything, she is attempting to salvage her reputation by discrediting yours. How do we stop this? Mara asked, frustration mounting as she scrolled through an increasing number of comments and shares beneath the fabricated post. We will issue a formal statement, along with actual bank records proving no such transaction ever occurred, Daniel said. In the meantime, please avoid engaging with the accusations directly. Responding publicly often only fuels further speculation. Despite Daniel's reassurance, the following days proved difficult for Mara, as she noticed subtle changes in the way people looked at her. Some customers at the diner whispering among themselves, a few even leaving without ordering once they recognized her from the spreading rumors. The unfairness of it burned deeply, especially after everything she had risked to expose the truth. It was during this difficult period that Eleanor visited Mara personally once more, finding her in a quiet moment near the end of a particularly draining shift. I heard what has been happening, Eleanor said, her expression a mixture of anger and sympathy. I am so sorry you are facing this, after everything you have already sacrificed. It's frustrating, Mara admitted, allowing herself a rare moment of vulnerability. I did the right thing, and now people think I did it for money. The truth will prevail, Eleanor said firmly. It always does, even if it takes time. She reached out and squeezed Mara's hand gently. In the meantime, know that our family stands firmly behind you. We will not allow these lies to continue unanswered. True to her word, within days, a carefully worded statement was released, accompanied by verified financial records demonstrating clearly that no payment had ever been made to Mara. The statement also included a brief, dignified account of the threats Mara had personally received from Priscilla, shifting public sympathy noticeably in her favor as the fabricated narrative began to unravel. Still, the experience left a lingering mark on Mara, a weariness that came from realizing just how easily the truth could be twisted, how quickly public opinion could shift based on nothing more than a carefully crafted lie. She found herself withdrawing slightly, more cautious in her interactions, more guarded in her trust of those outside her closest circle. It was Eleanor's son who noticed this shift most clearly, visiting the diner more frequently in the weeks that followed, his presence a quiet, steady reassurance amid the lingering chaos. Their conversations, once centered entirely around the unfolding conflict with Priscilla, gradually shifted toward lighter topics, moments of genuine connection that surprised Mara with how naturally they developed. You seem tired, he observed one evening, joining her in the diner's corner booth during a rare lull in her shift. It's been a long few weeks, Mara admitted, allowing herself a small, honest laugh. I didn't expect stopping one slap would lead to all of this. No one ever does, he said, a small, genuine smile crossing his face, one Mara had rarely seen from him before. But I am endlessly grateful that you did. How is your mother holding up? Mara asked, steering the conversation toward safer territory. Better, now that the truth is finally acknowledged publicly, he said. She speaks of you often, you know. She considers you family, in every way that matters. Mara felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest at those words. I've grown quite fond of her as well, she admitted. She's remarkable. She is, he agreed, his gaze lingering on Mara a moment longer than necessary before he continued. As are you, Mara, though I suspect you rarely allow yourself to hear that. Mara felt heat rise to her cheeks, unsure how to respond to such direct sincerity. I just did what felt right, she said quietly. That is precisely what makes it remarkable, he replied. Most people calculate risk and reward before acting. You simply acted, without hesitation, without expectation. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of Mara's phone buzzing against the counter, a message from her brother's hospital displaying on the screen. She excused herself quickly, her heart lurching with worry as she read the message, before relief washed over her at the news that it was simply a routine update regarding his ongoing treatment, nothing urgent. Everything all right? He asked, noticing her expression shift. Yes, just an update about my brother, Mara said, relief evident in her voice. How is he doing? He asked, genuine concern evident in his tone. "Stable. For now," Mara said. "The treatment seems to be working. Slowly but surely." "I'm glad to hear that," he said sincerely. "If there is ever anything he needs, please do not hesitate to ask." "Thank you," Mara said, touched once again by the genuine kindness this family continued to extend toward her, far beyond what she had ever expected in return for a single, instinctive act of protection. As the evening wore on and the diner grew quiet, their conversation deepened further, drifting into personal territory neither of them had previously explored. Childhood memories, quiet hopes for the future, small vulnerabilities shared cautiously between two people who had been thrust unexpectedly into each other's lives through circumstances neither of them could have predicted. When he finally rose to leave, later than he likely intended, he paused by the door and turned back toward Mara with an expression she could not quite decipher. "I find myself looking forward to these conversations more than I probably should admit," he said quietly. Mara felt her heart flutter unexpectedly at his words, though she quickly reminded herself of the vast gulf between their worlds, the impossibility of anything beyond simple gratitude ever truly developing between them. "I enjoy them as well," she said carefully, keeping her tone light, despite the warmth blooming unexpectedly in her chest. As he left, disappearing into the night once more, Mara stood by the window, watching his car pull away, questions swirling in her mind that she was not yet ready to fully confront. Whatever this connection was slowly becoming, she understood that it carried its own kind of risk, one perhaps even more complicated than the danger Priscilla had once represented. Just as life seemed to be settling into a quieter, more hopeful rhythm, an unexpected complication arose that threatened to unravel everything once more. Daniel arrived at the diner early one morning, his expression grave as he approached Mara before her shift had even properly begun. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "Priscilla has resurfaced, this time through legal channels. She has filed a lawsuit against the Cade family, claiming the evidence used to expose her was illegally obtained and seeking damages for what she describes as a coordinated attack on her reputation." Mara's stomach dropped. Can she actually win something like that? "It is unlikely, given the strength of our evidence," Daniel said, "but lawsuits like this can drag on for months, creating uncertainty and reputational damage regardless of the eventual outcome. She may also attempt to subpoena you as part of the proceedings, given your role as a witness." "What does that mean for me?" Mara asked, unease creeping back into her chest after weeks of relative calm. "It means you may be required to testify formally, under oath, rather than simply providing an account at a private gathering," Daniel explained. "It will be more formal, more scrutinized, and Priscilla's legal team will likely attempt to discredit your testimony however they can." The weeks that followed brought a fresh wave of tension into Mara's life, as she met repeatedly with lawyers representing the Cade family, carefully preparing her account of events for what would eventually become a formal deposition. The process felt exhausting, each question probing deeper into details she had not previously considered significant, each session leaving her drained in ways the earlier confrontations with Priscilla had not. Throughout this difficult period, Eleanor and her son remained a steady source of support, checking in frequently, ensuring Mara never felt as though she carried the burden alone. Eleanor, in particular, spent considerable time with Mara during this period, sharing her own experiences, testifying against Priscilla's earlier deceptions, offering practical advice on how to remain calm and clear under the pressure of hostile questioning. "They will try to make you doubt yourself," Eleanor warned during one such conversation. "They will ask the same questions repeatedly, phrased differently, hoping you will contradict yourself or grow flustered. Remember, you only need to speak the truth as you remember it. That is all anyone can ask of you." "What if I misremember something small?" Mara asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. "What if that's enough for them to discredit everything?" "Small inconsistencies in memory are normal and expected," Eleanor reassured her. "Any competent judge understands this. What matters is the consistency of the larger truth, not perfect recall of every minor detail." Despite this reassurance, Mara found herself increasingly anxious as the date of her formal deposition approached. She barely slept the night before, running through possible questions in her mind, rehearsing her account of events until the words felt worn smooth from repetition. The deposition itself took place in a sterile, formal conference room, Priscilla's legal team seated across from Mara, their expressions coldly professional, as they began their questioning. True to Eleanor's warning, they circled the same events repeatedly, attempting to find inconsistencies or moments of hesitation they could exploit. "You claim to have witnessed my client attempt to strike Eleanor Cade," one lawyer said, his tone carefully neutral despite the challenge embedded within his words. "Yet you were working during a busy shift, focused on your duties. How can you be certain of exactly what you saw?" "I was standing close enough to intervene physically," Mara replied evenly, remembering Eleanor's advice to remain calm and factual. "There is no uncertainty about what I witnessed, because I experienced it directly." "And the threats you claim to have received," the lawyer continued, "you have no recorded evidence of these conversations, correct? Simply your word against my clients." "That is correct," Mara said. "However, I reported each threat immediately to Daniel, who can confirm the timing and content of those reports." The questioning continued for hours. Each attempt to shake her account met with the same calm, unwavering consistency Eleanor had encouraged her to maintain. By the time the deposition concluded, Mara felt utterly drained, though a quiet sense of pride settled over her as she realized she had held firm against every attempt to discredit her testimony. Eleanor's son was waiting outside the conference room when the deposition finally ended, his expression anxious until he saw Mara's exhausted but steady demeanor. "How did it go?" he asked, falling into step beside her as they walked toward the exit. "I told the truth," Mara said simply. "That's all I could do. That's all that was ever needed," he replied, his voice warm with evident pride. "Thank you, Mara. I know this has cost you more than anyone should reasonably ask. I chose this," Mara reminded him gently, "every step of the way." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the tension of the deposition slowly fading as the fresh air outside the building helped clear Mara's mind. "There is something I have been wanting to say," he said eventually, his tone shifting to something more personal, more hesitant than Mara had heard from him before. "What is it?" Mara asked, curiosity mingling with a flutter of nervous anticipation. "These past months, getting to know you through everything that has happened, has changed something in me," he said carefully. "I find myself caring about your well-being in ways that extend far beyond gratitude for what you did for my mother." Mara's breath caught slightly at the sincerity in his voice. "I feel something similar," she admitted quietly, "though I've tried not to dwell on it, given everything else happening around us." "Perhaps once this legal matter is finally resolved," he said, a hopeful note creeping into his tone, "we might explore what that feeling could become, without the shadow of danger and legal battles hanging over us." "I would like that," Mara said, a genuine smile spreading across her face for the first time in weeks. Their quiet moment was interrupted by Daniel's urgent approach, his expression tense as he delivered fresh news. "The judge has scheduled a preliminary ruling for next week," he said. "Given the strength of our evidence, legal counsel believes there is a strong chance the case will be dismissed entirely, before proceeding further." Relief flooded through Mara at the news, though a cautious wariness remained, aware that Priscilla had proven repeatedly that she was not someone who accepted defeat easily, even when the odds were stacked clearly against her. As the week leading up to the ruling unfolded, Mara noticed a strange calm settling over the situation, an eerie quiet that felt almost more unsettling than the previous chaos, as though everyone involved understood that whatever happened next would mark a definitive turning point, one way or another, in the long conflict that had begun with a single slap in a quiet roadside diner. The day of the preliminary ruling arrived, with a tension so thick it seemed to hang in the air itself. Mara sat beside Eleanor in the courtroom gallery, watching as lawyers on both sides prepared their final arguments before the judge, a stern woman whose expression gave away nothing of her eventual decision. Priscilla sat across the room, her posture rigid, her expression carefully composed, despite the mounting evidence stacked against her. When Priscilla's legal team rose to present their closing argument, they attempted one final desperate maneuver, suggesting that the entire case had been orchestrated by the Cade family to eliminate a business rival who threatened their control over company assets. The judge listened with visible skepticism, occasionally glancing toward the mountain of verified financial evidence laid out before her. When it came time for the Cade family's legal team to respond, they methodically dismantled each accusation, presenting clear documentation of the fraud Priscilla had committed. alongside verified testimony regarding the threats made against Mara and her brother. The judge's expression grew increasingly stern as the presentation continued, her patience with Priscilla's team visibly thinning. Finally, after hours of arguments and counter-arguments, the judge called for a brief recess before delivering her ruling. Mara felt Eleanor's hand find hers, squeezing gently in silent reassurance as they waited anxiously for the courtroom to reconvene. When the judge returned, her ruling was swift and decisive. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, she stated firmly, "This court finds no merit in the plaintiff's claims." Furthermore, given the substantial evidence of fraud and intimidation presented during these proceedings, this court is referring this matter to the appropriate authorities for further criminal investigation. A wave of relief swept through the Cade family's side of the courtroom, while Priscilla's expression crumbled entirely, her carefully maintained composure finally shattering under the weight of the judge's words. As she was escorted from the courtroom by her own legal team, her eyes met Mara's one final time, filled with a bitter, hollow anger that carried no more power to threaten or intimidate. Outside the courthouse, Eleanor embraced Mara tightly, tears of relief glistening in her eyes. "It's over," she said softly. "Truly over." "Thank goodness," Mara said, allowing herself finally to fully exhale after months of accumulated tension. Eleanor's son approached moments later, his expression a mixture of relief and quiet joy as he took in the scene before him. "The nightmare is finally behind us," he said, his eyes finding Mara's with unmistakable warmth. "Thanks to you, more than anyone." "We did this together," Mara said, gesturing to include Eleanor, Daniel, and everyone else who had played a part in bringing Priscilla's deception to light. In the weeks that followed, news of Priscilla's criminal referral spread widely, her once carefully cultivated reputation collapsing entirely as further investigations revealed the true extent of her fraudulent activities that extended far beyond her attempted infiltration of the Cade family's company. Multiple other individuals came forward with similar stories, having been deceived and manipulated by Priscilla's carefully constructed schemes over the years. Life slowly returned to a version of normalcy for Mara, though it was a normalcy forever altered by everything she had experienced. She continued working at the diner, though her relationship with the Cade family had grown far beyond simple gratitude, into something resembling genuine friendship, and increasingly, something deeper with Eleanor's son. Their relationship developed slowly and carefully in the months following Priscilla's downfall, free finally from the shadow of danger and legal battles that had once consumed every interaction between them. They spent quiet evenings together, sometimes at the diner during Mara's shifts, sometimes exploring simple pleasures neither of them had allowed themselves time for previously, walks through quiet parks, dinners at unpretentious restaurants far removed from the formal gatherings of his usual world. Eleanor watched this development with quiet, evident joy, often remarking to Mara privately how genuinely happy she was to see her son opening himself to a connection built on authentic trust rather than the calculated ambitions that had once nearly cost their family everything. "You have brought something into his life that I feared he had lost entirely," Eleanor confided during one quiet afternoon visit. "A genuine warmth, an ability to trust without constant suspicion. I am endlessly grateful, Mara, not simply for what you did that first night, but for everything you have continued to give our family since." "He has given me just as much," Mara replied honestly. "A sense of purpose, a reminder that courage matters, even when it feels frightening in the moment." Months later, as the last remnants of the legal proceedings finally concluded with Priscilla facing formal criminal charges for fraud and intimidation, Mara found herself reflecting on how dramatically her life had transformed since that fateful evening in the diner. The quiet, invisible waitress, who had once moved unnoticed through her ordinary days, had become someone whose courage had reshaped not only her own future, but the future of an entire family, who had once seemed impossibly distant from her humble existence. Her brother's health continued improving steadily. His treatment fully secured through arrangements the Cade family had ensured remained protected, regardless of any external threats. Mara herself had begun exploring the possibility of returning to school, a dream she had set aside years earlier, now supported fully by people who had come to genuinely care for her well-being beyond any debt of gratitude. As the one-year anniversary of that fateful night approached, Eleanor's son surprised Mara with an invitation to dinner at the same modest diner where everything had begun, a gesture that carried deep sentimental weight given everything that had transpired since. Sitting together in the same booth where Priscilla had once raised her hand in anger, they reflected quietly on the unlikely journey that had brought them to this moment. "Do you ever regret stepping in that night?" he asked softly, studying her with an expression of genuine curiosity. Mara considered the question carefully before answering. "Never," she said firmly. "It cost me comfort, safety, and peace of mind for a while. But it gave me purpose, and it gave me you, and your mother, and a chance to matter in ways I never thought possible." He reached across the table and took her hand gently, his eyes warm with an emotion that needed no further words to convey its depth. "I am endlessly grateful you did," he said quietly. "Every single day since." As they sat together in the quiet diner, the same space where an act of instinctive courage had irrevocably changed the course of so many lives, Mara understood clearly that some of life's most significant transformations begin not with grand ambition, but with a single moment of unhesitating bravery, a willingness to step between danger and innocence, regardless of the unknown consequences that might follow. The waitress who had once stopped a slap meant for someone else had, in doing so, discovered a strength and purpose she never knew she carried within her, proving that true courage, however small it might seem in the moment, has the power to reshape entire lives, and occasionally, entire families, forever.